Hey guys, I'm going to start reading where we left off in third period. They're a little bit behind fourth period. So if you were in my fourth period class, I'll give you the timestamp so that you know where to fast forward on the Google Classroom site. But anyway, we're going to start out with third period. And again, this book, if you have it, it's at the bottom of page 32 is where we left off today. It was a flaking three-story house in the ancient part of the city, a century old if it was a day. But like all houses, it had been given a thin, fireproof plastic sheath many years ago, and this preservative shell seemed to be the only thing holding it in the sky. Here we are. The engine slammed to a stop. Beatty, Stoneman, and Black ran up the sidewalk, suddenly odious and fat in their plump fireproof slickers. Montag followed. They crashed the front door and grabbed at a woman, though she was not running. She was not trying to escape. She was only standing, weaving from side to side, her eyes fixed upon a nothingness in the wall, as if they had struck her a terrible blow upon the head. Her tongue was moving in her mouth, and her eyes seemed to be trying to remember something, and then they remembered, and her tongue moved again. Play the man, Mr. Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England, as I trust shall never be put out. Enough of that, said Beatty. Where are they? He slapped her face with amazing objectivity and repeated the question. The old woman's eyes came to a focus upon Beatty. You know where they are, or you wouldn't be here, she said. Stoneman held out the telephone alarm card with the complaint signed in telephone duplicate on the back. Have reason to suspect attic, 11 number, Elm, City, E.B. That would be my neighbor, Mrs. Blake, said the woman, reading the initials. All right, men, let's get 'em. Next thing, they were up in the musty blackness, swinging silver hatchets at doors that were, after all, unlocked, tumbling through like boys all rollick and shout. Hey! A fountain of books sprang down upon Montag as he climbed shuddering up the sheer stairwell. How inconvenient! Always before, it had been like snuffing a candle. The police went first and adhesive taped the victim's mouth and bandaged him off into their glittering beetle cars, so when you arrived you found an empty house. You weren't hurting anyone. You were hurting only things. And since things really can't be hurt, since things felt nothing and things don't scream or whimper, as this woman might begin to scream and cry out, there was nothing to tease your conscience later. You were simply cleaning up. Janitorial work, essentially. Everything in its proper place. Quick with the kerosene. Who's got a match? But now, tonight, someone had slipped. The woman was spoiling the ritual. The men were making too much noise, laughing, joking, to cover her terrible accusing silence below. She made the empty rooms roar with accusation and shake down a fine dust of guilt that was sucked in their nostrils as they plunged about. It was neither cricket nor correct. Montag felt an immense irritation. She shouldn't be here, on top of everything. Okay, a couple things. First of all, notice how Beatty behaved when he got to this house. The woman was there. She wasn't fighting him. She wasn't arguing. She didn't even really say very much. And they entered the house as if they were there to terrorize her. And then he slapped her. She's an old woman, like probably in her 70s. And he felt like it was okay to slap her when he got there. And then they're going through the house. They're taking the axe to all these doors. Well, the doors aren't even locked. It's like these men thrive on the destruction that they offer in these homes. And that's the thing that Montag has a conscience about. She's here. She's watching them. They're about to destroy her house and burn her books. And she's watching it. And that's what he says. The police went first and adhesive taped the victim's mouth. Really? Think about what would happen today if the police came in and duct taped the mouth of the victim. You know that wouldn't work. But in this futuristic society, that's how they handled people who broke the law. They came in and duct taped their mouths and put them in the back of the police car and took them away to the asylum. Books bombarded his shoulders, his arms, his upturned face. A book lit almost obediently like a white pigeon in his hands, wings fluttering. In the dim, wavering light, a page hung open, and it was like a snowy feather, the words delicately painted thereon. In all the rush and fervor, Montag had only an instant to read a line, but it was blazed in his mind for the next minute as if stamped there with fiery steel. Time has fallen asleep in the afternoon sunshine. He dropped the book. Immediately, another fell into his arms. Montag, up here! Montag's hand closed like a mouth, crushed the book with wild devotion, with an insanity of mindlessness to his chest. The men above were hurling shovelfuls of magazines into the dusty air. They fell like slaughtered birds, and the woman stood below like a small girl among the bodies. Montag had done nothing. His hand had done it all. His hand, with a brain of its own, with a conscience and a curiosity in each trembling finger, had turned thief. Now it plunged the book back under his arm, pressed it tight to sweating armpit, rushed out empty with a magician's flourish. "Look here, innocent, look." He gazed shaken at the white hand. He held it way out as if it were far-sighted. He held it close as if he were blind. "Montag!" He jerked about. "Don't stand there, idiot!" The books lay like great mounds of fishes left to dry. The men danced and slipped and fell over them. Titles glittered their golden eyes, falling, gone. Kerosene! They pumped the cold fluid from the numeraled 451 tanks strapped to their shoulders. They coated each book. They pumped rooms full of it. They hurried downstairs, Montag staggering after them in the kerosene fumes. "Come on, woman!" The woman knelt among the books, touching the drenched leather and cardboard, reading the gilt titles with her fingers while her eyes accused Montag. "You can't ever have my books," she said. "You know the law," said Beatty. "Where's your common sense? None of those books agree with each other. You've been locked up here for years with a regular damn Tower of Babel. Snap out of it. The people in those books never lived. Come on now." She shook her head. "The whole house is going up," said Beatty. The men walked clumsily to the door. They glanced back at Montag, who stood near the woman. "You're not leaving her here," he protested. "She won't come." "Force her, then." Beatty raised his hand, in which he concealed the igniter. "We're due back at the house. Besides, these fanatics always try suicide. The pattern's familiar." Montag placed his hand on the woman's elbow. "You can come with me." "No," she said. "Thank you anyway." "I'm counting to 10, said Beatty. 1, 2. "Please," said Montag. "Go on," said the woman. 3, 4. "Here." Montag pulled at the woman. The woman replied quietly, "I want to stay here." 5, 6. "You can stop counting," she said. She opened the fingers of one hand slightly, and in the palm of the hand was a single slender object, an ordinary kitchen match. The sight of it rushed the men out and down away from the house. Captain Beatty, keeping his dignity, backed slowly through the front door, his pink face burnt and shiny from 1,000 fires and night excitements. God, thought Montag, how true. Always at night the alarm comes. Never by day. Is it because fire is prettier by night? More spectacle? A better show? The pink face of Beatty now showed the faintest panic in the door. The woman's hand twitched on the single matchstick. The fumes of kerosene bloomed up about her. Montag felt the hidden book pound like a heart against his chest. "Go on," said the woman, and Montag felt himself back away and away out the door, after Beatty, down the steps across the lawn, where the path of kerosene lay like the track of some evil snail. On the front porch, where she had come to weigh them quietly with her eyes, her quietness a condemnation, the woman stood motionless. Beatty flicked his fingers to spark the kerosene. He was too late. Montag gasped. The woman on the porch reached out with contempt to them all and struck the kitchen match against the railing. People ran out of houses all down the street. So something to bring your attention to. First of all, who sounded the alarm? It was a neighbor. That's all it takes, is a neighbor calling in and saying, "Oh, so-and-so down the street has books in her house." So it's pretty much an honor system. And even then, typically the police are supposed to come first, take away the perpetrator, sort of check the house to make sure that the books are there, and then the firemen would come and burn everything down. But it wasn't done that way this time. There was a mistake that was made. The woman was still there, but yes, she did have books. The thing I'm trying to make you understand is that if you got mad at your neighbor, you could easily call in the alarm on them. Who knows? They may actually have something. But that's the problem. It wasn't like she was caught by the police. She was turned in by a neighbor. Now, most of us, again, we're thinking back 1950s. most people knew their neighbors. Their neighbors would come into their house pretty much by knocking on the door and opening the door and coming in. This exhibits a future where people aren't comfortable with each other. They don't trust each other, which again is very similar to what's happening in our future today. Now, the fact that she chooses to set fire herself. She chooses to die. She commits suicide rather than be sent to the asylum. She chooses to die with her books. Montag's having a hard time with this. And I hope you got the part where he stole a book. He put a book inside his jacket when they were being thrown down from the attic. But the thing I do want to also show you is the fact that he says, always at night the alarm comes. Think about it. If you do a fire pit in your backyard, you're going to roast marshmallows, you're going to listen to music, probably don't do that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Most people do that in the evening because fire is pretty, fire is beautiful. And so that's what happens. Nobody ever calls an alarm in during the day. What good is that? They call in it at night, and everybody on the street comes out of their homes to watch. It's a spectacle. Kind of like if you're driving down the road and there's a car accident and everybody slows down to look. It's a spectacle. People like to see things like that. And again, this is just showing what people in the future are going to behave like. They said nothing on their way back to the firehouse. Nobody looked at anyone else. Montag sat in the front seat with Beatty and Black. They did not even smoke their pipes. They sat there looking out the front of the great salamander as they turned a corner and went silently on. Master Ridley, said Montag at last. What? Said Beatty. She said Master Ridley. She said some crazy thing when we came in the door. Play the man, she said, Master Ridley, something, something, something. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out, said Beatty. Stoneman glanced over at the captain, as did Montag, startled. Beatty rubbed his chin. A man named Latimer said that to a man named Nicholas Ridley, as they were being burnt alive at Oxford for heresy on October 16, 1555. Does that surprise you that Beatty actually knows a quote? Montag and Stoneman went back to looking at the street as it moved under the engine wheels. I'm full of bits and pieces, said Beatty. Most fire captains have to be. Sometimes I surprise myself. Watch it, Stoneman. Stoneman braked the truck. Damn, said Beatty, you've gone right by the corner where we turned for the firehouse. Something else, going back to our literature connection, that quote was actually an allusion. We talked about allusions when we did Poe, but this man was being burnt alive for heresy. Heresy has to do with religion. This was during the time Henry VIII, Queen Mary, Bloody Mary, then Elizabeth, through that point of time where if you didn't believe the religion of the current monarch, they burned you. So when Mary became queen after Henry VIII's death, if you weren't Catholic and you were Protestant, she burned you at the stake. She executed you for your beliefs, for going against what she felt as the government. So it's ironic that he looks at it with this quote. You're making an allusion to something that happened in history. And it's making that allusion. She chose those words because that's what's happening to her. She's burning because of her beliefs. Who is it? Who would it be? Said Montag, leaning back against the closed door in the dark. His wife said at last, Well, put on the light. I don't want the light. Come to bed. He heard her roll impatiently. The bed spring squealed. Are you drunk? She said. So it was the hand that started it all. He felt one hand and then the other work his coat free and let it slump to the floor. He held his pants out into an abyss and let them fall into darkness. His hands had been infected, and soon it would be his arms. He could feel the poison working up his wrists and into his elbows and his shoulders, and then the jump over from shoulder blade to shoulder blade like a spark leaping a gap. His hands were ravenous, and his eyes were beginning to feel hunger as if they must look at something, anything, everything. His wife said, What are you doing? He balanced in space with the book in his sweating, cold fingers. A minute later she said, Well, don't just stand there in the middle of the floor. He made a small sound. What? She asked. He made more soft sounds. He stumbled toward the bed and shoved the book clumsily under the cold pillow. He fell into bed, and his wife cried out, startled. He lay far across the room from her, on a winter island separated by an empty sea. She talked to him for what seemed a long while, and she talked about this, and she talked about that, and it was only words, like the words he heard once in a nursery at a friend's house, a 2-year-old child building word patterns, talking jargon, making pretty sounds in the air. But Montag said nothing, and after a long while, when he only made the small sounds, he felt her move in the room and come to his bed and stand over him and put her hand down to feel his cheek. He knew that when she pulled her hand away from his face, it was wet. He was crying. Late in the night, he looked over at Mildred. She was awake. There was a tiny dance of melody in the air. Her seashell was tamped in her ear again, and she was listening to far people in far places, her eyes wide and staring at the fathoms of blackness above her in the ceiling. Wasn't there an old joke about the wife who talked so much on the telephone that her desperate husband ran out to the nearest store and telephoned her to ask her what was for dinner? Well, then, why didn't he buy himself an audio seashell broadcasting station and talk to his wife late at night? Murmur, whisper, shout, scream, yell. But why would he whisper? What would he yell? What could he say? And suddenly she was so strange he couldn't believe he knew her at all. He was in someone else's house, like those other jokes people told of the gentleman drunk coming home late at night, unlocking the wrong door, entering a wrong room, and betting with a stranger, and getting up early and going to work, and neither of them the wiser. "Millie?" he whispered. "What?" "I didn't mean to startle you. What I want to know is, well, when did we meet? And where?" "When did we meet for what?" she asked. "I mean originally." He knew she must be frowning in the dark. He clarified it. "The first time we ever met, where was it and when?" "Why, it was at—" She stopped. "I don't know," she said. He was cold. "Can't you remember? It's been so long." "Only 10 years, that's all. Only 10. "Don't get excited. I'm trying to think." She laughed that odd little laugh that went up and up. "Funny. How funny not to remember where or when you met your husband or wife." He lay massaging his eyes, his brow, and the back of his neck slowly. He held both hands over his eyes and applied a steady pressure there as if to crush memory into place. It was suddenly more important than any other thing in a lifetime that he know where he had met Mildred. "It doesn't matter." She was up in the bathroom now, and he heard the water running and the swallowing sound she made. "No, I guess not," he said. He tried to count how many times she swallowed, and he thought of the visit from the 2 zinc oxide-faced men, with the cigarettes in their straight-line mouths and the electronic-eyed snake winding down into the layer upon layer of night and stone and stagnant spring water. And he wanted to call out to her, "How many have you taken tonight? The capsules. How many will you take later and not know?" And so on, every hour, and maybe not tonight, tomorrow night, and me not sleeping tonight or tomorrow night or any night for a long while now that this has started. And he thought of her lying on the bed with the 2 technicians standing straight over her, not bent with concern, but only standing straight, arms folded. And he remembered thinking then that if she died, he was certain he wouldn't cry. For it would be the dying of an unknown, a street face, a newspaper image, and it was suddenly so very wrong that he had begun to cry, not at death, but at the thought of not crying at death, a silly, empty man near a silly, empty woman, while the hungry snake made her still more empty. How do you get so empty, he wondered. Who takes it out of you? And that awful flower the other day, the dandelion, it had summed everything up, hadn't it? What a shame you're not in love with anyone. And why not? Well, wasn't there a wall between him and Mildred when you came down to it? Literally, not just 1 wall, but so far 3. And expensive, too. And the uncles, the aunts, the cousins, the nieces, the nephews that lived in those walls, the gibbering pack of tree apes that said nothing, 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 and said it loud, loud, loud. He had taken to calling them relatives from the very first. How's Uncle Louis today? Who? And Aunt Maud. The most significant memory he had of Mildred really was of a little girl in a forest, without trees. How odd. Or rather a little girl lost on a plateau where there used to be trees. You could feel the memory of their shapes all around, sitting in the center of the living room. The living room. What a good job of labeling that was now. No matter when he came in, the walls were always talking to Mildred. Something must be done. Yes, something must be done. Well, let's not stand and talk. Let's do it. I'm so mad I could spit. What was it all about? Mildred couldn't say. Who was mad at whom? Mildred didn't quite know. What were they going to do? Well, said Mildred, wait around and see. He had waited around to see. A great thunderstorm of sound gushed from the walls. Music bombarded him at such an immense volume that his bones were almost shaking from their tendons. He felt his jaw vibrate, his eyes wobble in his head. He was a victim of concussion. When it was all over, he felt like a man who'd been thrown from a cliff, whirled in a centrifuge, and spat out over a waterfall that fell into emptiness and never quite touched bottom. Never quite. No, not quite, touched bottom. And you fell so fast you didn't touch the sides either. Never quite touched anything. There, said Mildred. And it was indeed remarkable. Something had happened. Even though the people in the walls of the room had barely moved and nothing had really been settled, you had the impression that someone had turned on a washing machine or sucked you up in a gigantic vacuum. You drowned in music and pure cacophony. He came out of the room sweating and on the point of collapse. Behind him, Mildred sat in her chair and the voices went on again. Well, everything will be all right now, said an aunt. Oh, don't be too sure, said a cousin. Now don't get angry. Who's angry? You are. I am? You're mad. Why would I be mad? Because. That's all very well, cried Montag, but what are they mad about? Who are these people? Who's the man and who's that woman? Are they husband and wife? Are they divorced, engaged? What? Good God, nothing is connected up. They, said Mildred, well, they had this fight, you see. They certainly fight a lot. You should listen. I think they're married. Yes, they're married. Why? If it was not the 3 walls, soon to be 4 walls, and the dream complete, then it was the open car and Mildred driving 100 miles an hour across town. He shouting at her and she shouting back and both trying to hear what was said, but hearing only the scream of the car. At least keep it down to the minimum, he yelled. What? She cried. Keep it down to 55, the minimum, he shouted. The what? She shrieked. Speed, he shouted, and she pushed it up to 105 miles an hour and tore the breath from his mouth. When they stepped out of the car, she had the seashells stuffed in her ears. Silence, only the wind blowing softly. Mildred, he stirred in bed. He reached over and pulled the tiny musical insect out of her ear. Mildred, Mildred. Yes, her voice was faint. Now, real quick, before we go on, I want to talk a little bit about what's happened here. How many of you have ever gotten so involved in a television show, watching it, and the people who are involved, that you kind of forgot about your real life because you were so worried about what was going on the TV show? This is very much like what we have with reality TV today, where people just get up and they behave as if the cameras are just a part of their everyday life. And Montag is looking for some sort of storyline, like it's a movie that starts off, or like it's a real book where you want to know what the problem is and what the people are doing and how they're resolving the conflict. And it's not like that. This is like watching an episode of The Kardashians, or, maybe even The Bachelor, or something where you don't know what's going to happen. And sometimes the people sit around talking about nothing. And then before you know it, an hour is up and you've watched people sit around talking about nothing. Mildred has no idea what they're doing, and she doesn't care. She just would rather be wrapped up in the lives of the people on the screen than be living her own life. Montag's not satisfied with that. He wants his life, not somebody else's. And then when he's talking about the fact that he doesn't even know her, he's angry and he's upset because they can't remember where they met. He can't remember anything about their life together. And then it makes him sad because he knows that if she died, he wouldn't cry. She's like a stranger to him. So imagine having a spouse and they died and it didn't even bother you. It didn't matter, because they were just somebody living in your house. It's pretty sad, and it describes the state of their marriage. And unfortunately, you know, in our current society, and again, we're looking at this from the future, that's the status of some people's marriage in our current society. And what do you think about the driving? You know, people that drive 105 miles an hour, that didn't happen in the 1950s. Cars didn't even go that fast. But I can promise you, you get on like 285 around Atlanta. I think at one time they did a study down near the airport, and the average speed of cars going on 285 down at the airport was right around 100 miles per hour. And that was average. So you knew people were going a lot faster than that as well. Back in the 50s, like we talked about the other day, most people didn't go above 40, 45. And that's what they do for fun. They get in the car and they drive fast. That's how they entertain themselves. He felt he was one of the creatures electronically inserted between the slots of the phono-colored walls, speaking, but the speech not piercing the crystal barrier. He could only pantomime, hoping she would turn his way and see him. They could not touch through the glass. "Mildred, do you know that girl I was telling you about?" "What girl?" She was almost asleep. "The girl next door." "What girl next door?" "You know, the high school girl. Clarice, her name is." "Oh, yes," said his wife. "I haven't seen her for a few days. 4 days to be exact. Have you seen her?" "No." "I meant to talk to you about her. Strange." "Oh, I know the one you mean." "I thought you would." "Her," said Mildred in the dark room. "What about her?" asked Montag. "I meant to tell you. Forgot. "Tell me now. What is it?" "I think she's gone." "Gone?" "Whole family moved out somewhere, but she's gone for good. I think she's dead." "We couldn't be talking about the same girl." "No, same girl. McClellan, run over by a car 4 days ago. I'm not sure, but I think she's dead. Family moved out anyway. I don't know, but I think she's dead." "You're not sure of it?" "No, not sure. Pretty sure." "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I forgot." 4 days ago?" "I forgot all about it." 4 days ago, he said, quietly lying there. They lay there in the dark room, not moving, either of them. "Good night," she said. He heard a faint rustle. Her hand moved. The electric thimble moved like a praying mantis on the pillow, touched by her hand. Now it was in her ear again, humming. He listened, and his wife was singing under her breath. Outside the house, a shadow moved. An autumn wind rose up and faded away. But there was something else in the silence that he heard. It was like a breath exhaled upon the window. It was like a faint drift of greenish, luminescent smoke, the motion of a single huge October leaf blowing across the lawn and away. The hound, he thought. It's out there tonight. It's out there now. If I open the window. He did not open the window. Okay, I'm going to pause it, and then I'm going to do part 2 in just a minute.